with the biggest story in sports on Saturday. Jim Harbaugh will not be on the sideline today to coach the Wolverines in their game against Penn State. Harbaugh was suspended by the Big Ten on Friday. Michigan had hoped to secure a temporary restraining order that would allow him to coach. However, a ruling will not be handed down today. The court has reportedly scheduled an in-person hearing for Friday. Offensive coordinator Sharon Moore will fill in with Harbaugh not on the sideline. Now, the University of Michigan issued a short statement after word came out Harbaugh would not be available today, simply saying we look forward to presenting our case next week, where we intend to demonstrate that the Big Ten has not acted legally or fairly. All right, let's bring in college football writer Dennis Dodd for more on this. Dennis, a lot has happened just in the last couple of hours. Let's get your thoughts on everything. Where are we right now, 19 hours after the decision to suspend Harbaugh came down?
Well, obviously, you mentioned it up top that Jim Harbaugh will not coach today. The judge in charge of that temporary restraining order hearing has delayed it until an in-person hearing next Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern. That's a day, basically a day before the game with Maryland, to hear this in person. And for all the critics out there who, Michigan got, home cooking in Washtenaw County, which is where Ann Arbor is. Well, of course their lawyers are going to try to file in the home county. But I think the judge here showed some restraint. I'm looking at the temporary request order right now, and it's big. It's 26 pages. There's a lot to digest. I think to fairly do this, and I'm putting words in the judge's mouth, I think he just put it off so the judge could read over it and digest everything. I think it's a happy medium. Michigan doesn't like that he's not coaching today, but at least they get an in-person hearing to make their case next Friday. And so, we talk about separation Saturday, guys. What about irony Saturday? Michigan started this season with a 3-game suspension of Jim Harbaugh by Michigan. Right now, they're going to end the season with a 3-game suspension of Jim Harbaugh by the Big Ten. And speaking of ironies, here's the first line of the temporary request order. Sportsmanship is founded upon principles of integrity, respect, and fair play. So it is a poignant irony that the Big Ten invoked its sportsmanship policy in this case. Take it from there, guys.
Yeah, the question I have is, Dennis, has the sportsmanship clause ever been noted in something like this? Because my understanding is that the penalty under the sportsmanship clause, the violation of it, is certainly a lot less than what we're seeing handed down to Michigan right now. Oh, yeah, it's been invoked 21 months ago at Michigan. Juwan Howard was suspended for 4 games after that brawl with Wisconsin postgame in basketball. That was a violation of the sportsmanship policy. In that policy, it is not noted that if you get in a brawl, you're suspended, but the language is broad enough that at least the conference thought it applied here. Who would ever think to put in a sportsmanship policy that you had a slappy fanboy making a colored spreadsheet and going all over the country to the point that he was scouting possible playoff opponents, and I'm talking about Connor Stallions. So, no, this has been invoked many times. There's similar language in every conference, but you usually get it. Look, you guys know this. This is usually applied when a coach in the postgame is mad and criticizes officials. He's reprimanded or fined or something like that. Seldom do you see a suspension. Dennis, you're in contact with others around the college football world. What's been the overall reaction? Is there a sense that the punishment fits what we know at this point about the crime?
Well, it's just over the top. The entire episode. I think people on both sides can make logical cases for and against what's happened. How did it ever get to this case that a commissioner is ruling against maybe the biggest blue blood in his conference? But as I wrote last night, Tony Petitti had 2 choices. He could piss off the 13 schools, which were angry that this happened, or he could make the maize and blue upset by doing this ruling. I think for his sake, his ability, his credibility to stay as commissioner and govern the conference, this is the only decision he could make, at least in the short term.
He is college football writer Dennis Dodd giving us a Michigan update as the team gets set to face Penn State on the field Saturday, their biggest game of the season. They will do it without their head coach, Jim Harbaugh, who is going to face an in-person hearing next Friday with Judge Timothy Connors over the temporary restraining order that the university wants to put in place that would allow him to get back on the field. So he will not be on the sideline today as they face number 10 Penn State. They get Maryland next week, so the hope being if they get the TRO granted, he would be on the field for that. And a restraining order granted in Michigan has a 14-day window unless it is extended. So it would be initially 14 days, which means he would likely be on the sideline as well for the Ohio State game. Let's welcome in the publisher of the Michigan Insider for 24/7 Sports, Sam Webb. Sam, there was a lot made of the fact that the judge in this case, Timothy Connors, is a lecturer within U of M's law program. But it appears, based on what we know today, that he is going to take his time here to come to a decision.
There's no doubt. I think to say that Michigan is surprised, I don't think is an overstatement or being presumptuous. I think they felt confident on the merits of the case, and not just because it was heard in Washtenaw County. But what the judge, the conclusion that he reached, at least based on the interpretation of our legal insiders, is that the harm wasn't sufficient enough to Michigan to grant the TRO ex parte, meaning, you know, he wasn't going to rule in Michigan's favor without hearing from the Big Ten, hearing the Big Ten side of this. So that being the case, it is delayed until Friday. And at that point, both sides, not just Michigan, the Big Ten will be able to argue its position as well to see if and then the judge will rule accordingly based on what he hears from both sides.
And that was one of the arguments that we had heard about, was the fact that the Big Ten was going to make the case that the harm to Michigan is actually not that much, considering they were without their head coach for the first 3 games of the season and essentially boat raced all their opposition. Obviously, the opposition at the end of the season, not the same as at the beginning. So some interesting arguments to make for that in-person hearing coming up next week. But let's talk about what's happening right now. So Harbaugh's not going to be on the sideline. How do things change from a calling the game perspective with Sharon Moore now acting as the head coach?
So I find it hard to believe that he will take his hands off the steering wheel completely. Michigan was preparing this week for Sharon to be the play caller. That I know for sure. Now, they have some reps with Kirk Campbell being the play caller as well. So what I'm betting will be the case is that Sharon will still drive it, but it'll be like a co-play caller sort of thing. And this is just my speculation on the matter, but it's informed speculation that he'll be the guy calling the plays with a whole lot of input, even more than usual, from Kirk Campbell, who's the quarterback's coach and who served as the play caller early in the season when both Harbaugh and Sharon Moore were suspended in the first game. And then when Sharon was the head coach, a couple of games later, for the Bowling Green game, Kirk Campbell called play. So I think you'll have play caller duties today.
Sam, you've obviously got, insiders. You are insider for 24/7 Sports. You know what's going on with this football team. What kind of an impact is all of this having on the team, the players in that room?
Yeah, I think that they have been really, really distracted is not the right word. They've been annoyed to the point of anger. Because this whole thing supposes the only reason they were winning these games. I mean, you're hearing it. I heard Josh Pate talking about it earlier. Folks in Penn State think that, well, maybe we got blown out last year because Michigan cheated. Well, Michigan blew Penn State out in 2018, 42-7. They blew Penn State out in 2016, 49-10. So it's like all of a sudden Connor Stallions is the big difference. That wasn't the big difference if you ask Michigan people after the 2020 season. It was Harbaugh went and got a defensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. He promoted Sharon Moore to offensive line coaches. They won back-to-back Joe Moore awards. He hired Mike Hart as the running backs coach. He hired Ron Bellamy as the wide receivers coach. He revamped his entire coaching staff. And then they go on the field and they do these things. This seems to be mostly about Ohio State. But if you look at the Ohio State games the last 2 years, in 2021, Michigan led 14-13 at halftime and then went on to blow them out 42-27. Last year, they were losing at halftime 20-17 and went on to blow them out 45-23. So did Michigan only use this stolen sign intel after halftime? That's how the players feel about it. They're like, okay, well, we're going to go prove that we won the games because we were just better. I think that's how it's affecting the players. If there's someone that's stressed, I would say that it's the coaches, but they're grown. I think they can compartmentalize. I sense they'll be able to get this team ready to go and to play their best football today.
Going to be very interesting to see how Michigan comes out, certainly in the first half of this game. He is Sam Webb, publisher of the Michigan Insider for 24/7 Sports, joining us here on the College Football Saturday pregame show. Great stuff as always, Sam. We'll catch up with you as we need to. All right, let's bring in Danny Cannell for more on this. Danny, I'll ask you the same question. I mean, if you're a player in that locker room and you're seeing all of this that's going on, what are you thinking?
I'll give you both sides, because I do think both sides are important, right? There are two teams that are impacted by this news, both the team that it's happening to and the opponent. For Michigan, I think what you heard there from Sam Webb would be the exact mentality that I would have if I was in that locker room. And you saw J.J. McCarthy put out the tweet, all right, bet, like, let's go. Like, we know now we got to go take care of business. And I would repeat the exact same things that Sam did. Like, hey, we've already beaten these teams. We don't need them. We can dominate them. We're going to go out there and do our job. Even a little bit angrier, as Sam alluded to, too. There would be an anger kind of brewing within that locker room, which is a great position to be in. When coaches give pregame talks, how many times this year have we heard them talk about chip on the shoulder or the reference another coach that took a shot at your team? All the time. You try to generate that kind of, that chip on the shoulder. Now you don't need to generate it. It is there by default. So I expect Michigan to be galvanized, come out together, come out like a swarm of bees. Now for Penn State, I also think there's a chance that they could be looking at this saying, all right, now's our chance, because there's always been a doubt for Penn State. They haven't been able to win this game. They have fallen on the short end of this one. And now they can say, you know what? Now it's a level playing field. They don't have that advantage. So now they can go out there and say, all right, let's do it. They're thinking the same thing. Bet, let's go. Now it's a level playing field. So I think it builds a little bit of confidence for them as well, knowing this matchup will be truly a level playing field.
We heard Dennis talking about, Tony Petitti and the decision that he made. The question I have for you, and you and I were kind of talking about this before we come on, is did he do the most that he could? I mean, based on what the evidence was, where the sportsmanship clause kind of allows you that kind of leeway, because there are people saying, okay, well, why didn't he just fine them? Why didn't he just suspend Harbaugh indefinitely? But do you think he did enough? He did give Michigan something because of the fact Harbaugh is going to be allowed to coach during the week. But then he gave the Big Ten something saying he can't coach on game day. Do you think he did the best he could?
Tony Petitti is he's in an unenviable position, right? This is one I would not want to have to legislate over this one. He's trying to appease both sides. I do think it's been mishandled. My biggest problem is, Jeremy, why couldn't you have waited 3 weeks? There's a massive gap between even the Big Ten championship game and when the playoffs could potentially happen, where you could have waited until then, until you had more clear-cut evidence. Because as the release stated, they could not connect Jim Harbaugh with knowledge of what was happening. So I think it was a rush to judgment. I absolutely hate the way that he waited until Michigan was on the plane to delay it just enough where they couldn't have enough time for the TRO to be filed. And now we're in this position where 2 hours before the game, the players are wondering, is our coach going to be here? That is completely unfair to the players for the Michigan Wolverines, and I hate that for them. So I think it's been mishandled. To your point, though, about is it enough to appease both sides? We're saying, oh, it's not that big a deal. It's just 3 games. They've already been through this. What if they lose? You don't think that's a big deal? Like, and now Michigan will have an excuse. They'll say, well, we didn't have our head coach. Right. I don't hear anybody talking about that possibility, like, because everyone thinks, oh, Michigan's going to run through them because they're so ticked off. If they lose, that is a significant harm to their playoff hopes and national championship dreams.
But the other side of that is that he's going to be involved in the game planning all week long. He's basically not going to be there just for the game. So, I mean, how big of a role does the head coach play on game day?
That's why, to me, I just think it's so dumb. Like, it is this kind of pseudo penalty just to appease the masses. But I do think Harbaugh is a guy who does make a lot of decisions, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. I think there's a lot of continuity between his philosophy and Sharon Moore and the offensive play calling that takes place. He's the guy that makes the decisions that in a game like this, when it is a tight spread, it is a rivalry, it's most likely to come down to the fourth quarter, that is going to make the decisions. Do we go for it on this 4th down around midfield, or do we punt it? Do we kick the field goal here, or do we go for it to extend a drive? Those are the most impactful decisions that are made during a game. So I absolutely think there's an impact. Will it, when we look at the stats after the game, I don't think it'll be that big of a difference. J.J. McCarthy will probably still have a good game. They'll try to get Blake Corum going. Yep. It's the game difference-making calls are the ones Harbaugh is usually making.
Well, Michigan certainly hoping they don't have a lot of those on this day. They are 4.5-point favorites as they go to Happy Valley to take on number 10, Penn State. Danny Cannell giving us his thoughts here on College Football Saturday.